How are you? Nice to see you again.
You are familiar with professional use. That's wonderful. We just come to a lot of events, I think. Yeah, especially legal. I went to one of those. So I usually go to those. Say those.
Yeah, so I want to ask about that.
Oh, okay. I'll be out there.
대학에서는 너무 안 그래서 그래서
How are you?
Yes, yes,
I know
yes.
it's like a guy's name, okay, so.
I love it. Yeah, come on, yeah.
This special exhibit viewing and the reception is co-sponsored by the libraries and the UCI Office of Global Engagement, and we're really honored to be partnering with you.
As are we.
And I just wanted to share a little bit about the exhibit. It highlights materials that South Korean researchers discovered recently in the U.S. National Archives and Records Administration, also known as NARA, in Washington, D.C. And so these materials document the tragic experience of Korean comfort women who were young girls and women forced into sexual slavery by the Imperial Japanese Army before and during World War II in occupied territories. And in the exhibit, you're going to see papers, photographs like what you see on the slide, but also in the video, be very patient, there is a very brief film clip, and this is thought to be the first filmed evidence of Korean comfort women. These materials came from a previous exhibit in South Korea, curated by Professor Sung Hyun Kang and Professor Chin Sung Chun, and we're very grateful to them. But we are also grateful and indebted to Professor Chung Woo Chae of the UCI School of Humanities East Asian Studies Department and Center for Critical Korean Studies. And through her contacts, we were able to receive copies of the materials that you see in the exhibit. And while Professor Che will be speaking in a few minutes on this program, I really wanted to say thank you to her, because this exhibit would not have been possible without Professor Che. So join me. This exhibit is particularly timely because the California Department of Education rather, has issued guidelines to include the topic of Korean comfort women in their high school curriculum. So this will really help educate students on a long overlooked chapter of history. And the materials you see will bear witness to the horrendous experience of Korean comfort women, and I should acknowledge that it's a tragic experience that also affected women in other countries such as Taiwan, China, Philippines, Indonesia, etc., who were forced to become sexual slaves as well. This exhibit shines a light on the broader issue of women's rights and sexual slavery during times of war and violations that still occur around the world today. So for all of those reasons, we think this exhibit is highly relevant and of broad interest to the campus and the community. And it's one of the reasons why we decided to have the exhibit stay up for so long. It will be up through December 1st. And we appreciate your help in spreading the word about it. Now, while most of the materials are from the U.S. National Archives, we have supplemented it with scholarly materials from UCI Library's collection. And that includes books and DVDs and journals. And this was curated by Dr. Ying Zhang, Research Librarian for Asian Studies, and our Korea Foundation library intern, Soo Kim Bae. And together they compiled this online bibliography of the library materials on the topic by and about Korean comfort women. And so please join me in thanking them for their work. I also want to mention that archives and libraries play an important role in documenting history. We have a symbiotic relationship with researchers, both faculty and students, in terms of providing information sources from different viewpoints and perspectives for their learning and scholarship and research. And so libraries and archives also preserve history for future generations, which is so important for memory building, for legacy, and paying it forward to the next generation. So at this point, I would like to acknowledge that many people helped to make this exhibit and this reception possible, and it ranges from our exhibits team, exhibit contributors, development, design services, communication events, facilities, and IT. So please join me in thanking all of them. And now the next speaker will be Professor Tyrus Miller, Dean of the UCI School of Humanities, which supports the important work of the Center for Critical Korean Studies.
The UCI Library's Korean Comfort Women and U.S. Discoveries exhibit. As Lorelei has already said, any event of this nature and consequence depends on the collaboration of many people, including archivists and librarians, researchers, administrative leaders, and our institutional partners and supporters. I want to thank all the people involved for making this exhibit possible. Korean studies is an area of research, learning, and public education that has grown in scale and importance at UC Irvine in the past decade especially. Thanks to the support of the Korea Foundation, which has supported faculty positions in the field of Korean studies, and the Academy of Korean Studies, which 3 years ago provided us with a generous grant to found the Center for Critical Korean Studies, that growth has markedly accelerated, while the interconnection of scholars and students across disciplines and spanning multiple schools at UC Irvine has grown richer. The Center for Critical Korean Studies promotes a deeper historical understanding of Korea, a broader understanding of Korea's place in the current dynamics of the world, politics, economy, culture, and the study of Korean language, not solely by students of Korean heritage, very important, but also by the many non-Korean heritage students that take our language and other courses because they've come to understand the interest, the attraction, and the importance of engaging more deeply with Korea. I want to also underscore that we have a wide institutional vision of Korean studies at UC Irvine, encompassing multiple schools and multiple disciplines. The School of Humanities houses the Center for Critical Korean Studies and the Department for East Asian Studies, which offers courses in both Korean language and Korean culture, literature, and media. There's also a substantial engagement with Korean studies from our Department of History, our Department of Gender and Sexuality Studies, our Department of Asian American Studies, and our Department of English, where our new director of the Center for Critical Korean Studies actually has his institutional home, Joseph Jung, who works on both Korean American poetry and other literature, but also on Korean film, Korean media, and Korean history. Along with the School of Humanities, we have active campus-level partnerships that include the School of Social Sciences, and I'd like to thank Bill Maurer for that, and with the School of Law, led by Saul Richardson. We are together seeking to further develop the scope and depth of research and teaching in Korean studies at UC Irvine, to build partnership relations with the most important universities and cultural institutions in Korea, and to continue our very active and very open engagement with our local and regional Korean communities, among the largest in the world outside of Korea. Now let me come back for a minute to the occasion of our coming together this afternoon, the exhibit of Korean Comfort Women and the U.S. Discoveries. The exhibit deals with a brutal and traumatic history involving the abduction and forcing into sexual slavery of tens of thousands of women in countries occupied by the Japanese Imperial Army, including Korea, China, the Philippines, and other countries. Not only, however, is this a traumatic episode from the historical past, it remains an unhealed and, to an extent, still disavowed injury in the present. Moreover, as recent situations of invasion, occupation, and civil war have shown, sexual violence against women has continued to recur as one of the most painful and deplorable aspects of the generally horrendous situation of war, wherever it occurs. Yet an exhibit like this one at UCI also contributes to some degree to redress and healing for injuries suffered in the past. It brings the experiences of these women to light after their having been consigned for so many years to silence and to shadow. It gives their voices and memories a channel of expression and transmission to later generations, and in our case, to an international public, far from the places in which they originally suffered this experience. It also, perhaps, gives them agency in warning us against forcing new generations to experience what they had to, and thus in being beacons of a better world in which such indignities have become, as they should, genuinely unimaginable. I want to thank you again for your coming, and I hope that you find our exhibit informative and inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Miller. And now I would like to introduce Professor Chong Che of the UCI Department of East Asian Studies and the Center for Critical Korean Studies in the School of Humanities. Professor Che researches historical trauma in South Korean film and literature, and researches contemporary women's narratives spanning from the post-Korean War period to the present. Her research on Korean comfort women is trailblazing, and she may speak a little bit about that. And as I mentioned earlier, Professor Che was truly instrumental in securing the agreement for us to display the materials that you see in the exhibit. Short of visiting South Korea, or the National Archives in Washington, D.C., this may be the only place in California or the nation where you can see some of these materials in person. So please join me in welcoming them.
Good evening, and thank you so much for coming and for the introduction and for the background. As I was just introduced, my research has to do with historical drama, and from the very beginning of my career, I started talking. It was 1991 in August 14th that first comfortwoman stepped forward in public to confess that she was one of them, and that's when the world was upside down. And immediately I was involved and started doing the research and working with them. And in fact, Professor Chung Jin-sung, whose team provided this, the images, I started working with her from the 90s. And for various reasons, I stayed slightly away from it, but the opportunities, two occasions arose for me to be rededicating myself to this. Is last year we decided to apply for the project to the Korean Ministry of Gender Equality and Family to translate the materials that they have in what they call e-museum and then make that globally accessible. So we would partner with the Ministry of the Korean Ministry of Gender Equality and Family, with the UCI, to translate all the materials into English and digitalize them, and so that we would have global access. So in that kind of context, we proposed a translation, exhibit, and international conference in digital archiving and maintenance. Yet that hasn't happened yet. I recently heard from the Deputy Minister's office that they are going to launch the archival project next year, and then they'll consider us as a partner. So hopefully that we will continue our partnership. Why did we want to do that? It's a rationale, and as Dean Miller just mentioned, there are just so many of violence against women still going on. Just to name a few, since this comfortwomen incident took place during World War II, but in the last 20 years, we see women being raped, and in fact, we have a term now, rape as a weapon of war. So in Rwanda, in Bosnian War, in Nigeria, in South Sudan, and in the Rohingya, and in the Myanmar, and in Iraq, and all of that. In fact, so much so that last year in 2018, the Nobel committee recognized two people as for Peace Prize. Those are the one young Yazidi woman who stepped forward and talked about the women being enslaved by IS, and the other one is gynecologist who has been curing and the victims in Africa. So in conjunction with that, the state of California does recognize the importance of that public education. So decided to include, as Laura Laitanji just mentioned, that they decided to include comfortwomen issues in the 10th grade social studies curriculum. So we had our very first workshop with the high school teachers last December. And so UCI exhibit contains some of these the materials that is useful. So I'm hoping that until December we will have the visits from high school teachers and the students as well. And the critical moment of that decision, or the elements that contributed to that decision, is this image. This picture here I don't know if you can see my the cursor, has been independently circulated for many years, and we did not know where that came from. And in 2000, the year 2000, there's a Tokyo tribunal for war crimes tribunal, and a North Korean woman stepped forward and identified this as herself. And her name is Park Yeon-shin, and but that is that, and then we have this kind of photos, which is interrogation. So these are sort of unrelated kind of photos that were being circulated, and it is definitely about comfort women, but we could not pinpoint as to where they come from, and we don't have the actual evidence. And last year, 2017, the aforementioned scholars discovered the footage of this in the National Archives. What do I do? That's good stuff. Okay. So it's only 18 seconds. So going back to that. So this is from the shot. So this woman, and this woman are the same women, as you can see. And this woman and this woman are the same. And this woman and this woman are the same. So finally, they figured out what happened. And in fact, with that footage, there's a record that it was taken in September 4th in Zhongshan, China, near the China-Burma border. So now we have the evidence, the actual. So now it has the historical meaning. So definitely then it is historical instance. And along with that, as you see, there are many. And also we found documents. It's there, and then you will see the name Park Yeon-shin, the woman the pregnant woman that was identified. So all of this fit together now with the written documents, report, and the footage, and the photos, and they are all fit together. So there's the unmovable evidence that these things really did happen and where it happened, etc. So now we have that, and in the exhibit there are 4 categories. I mean, there are many other categories we could have, but the 4 categories, and one is the comfort women recruitment system. As you walk in from I think the right, starting from there, and the management of comfort station, that kind of documents. And then comfort women taken to Southeast Asia, and that includes the Park Yeon-shin that you just saw. And then there's another one, the comfort women, group of comfort women that were taken but abandoned in Micronesian islands. And so that's the 3rd category. And then 4th category, as you come out, then you'll see the U.S. Psychological Warfare Unit reports about the Korean POWs that were captured among the Japanese military. So those are the 4, so in a way there's a narrative is what I'm trying to say, that those are 4 categories of women. Then why are these 4 categories? Because they're relevant to what we are doing, what we have done. That is the actual physical, the copy of the translation of the 9 comfort women testimonies. There had been 2 testimonies that actually are available in English, but those are the earlier ones. So these are the interview materials that have been sort of narrativized into the whoever did that. But ours is this one is the text that we use, and in which we see women who are taken to Southeast Asia, to China, to Micronesian islands, etc. That's why we included those women, the documents about those women in the exhibit. And so This one was done by the actual trained oral historians, so it was done perhaps most comprehensively, etc. So we chose to translate that, and I led a group of 6 graduate students to translate that in the Korean style, 빨리빨리, which is hurry, in 2 months. Over the Christmas break into the deadline was the February 20th. So in exactly 2 months, we translated the whole thing. And the way we did that was sort of social history considerations of these women, very, very sensitive to their upbringings, their background, etc. So it's not like the intellectuals are trying to impose ourselves on them, but trying to bring their voices out as they are. So the choice of vocabularies, they were not highly educated because they were taken at the young age and they missed the educational opportunities. They were taken from various, usually from the lower class, but various different dialect regions. So we had to consider all of those so that we would be accurately representing them. And so my consideration at the time is if this one is digitalized and if we make it into a audiobook or something, then those who will read or narrate will sound almost like the way they speak. So that's the kind of considerations. So linguistic and cultural considerations and their performativity, etc. So, and also why 6 people? I paired them. The non-native speakers, native speakers of Korean with the native speakers of English, or neo-native speakers English, pair them together. And then there's the English speakers, native, so that they can, she can go over the actual colloquial expressions in English. And then we have a team of consultants in Seoul, so that they can sort of cross-check with what we translate, with what they meant, etc. And then we actually sort of imagined ourselves to be speaking, so they were sort of practicing and talking to each other and read out loud and see if it sounds like what they etc. So so there's an endless processes of each piece. I think we went through at least 4 or 5 sort of renditions in 2 months. So then what I need to do at this point, as we mentioned earlier, California high school students can use it, or public can have access to it, as it can be used for digital archive. In fact, when I first took up this translation project, I was thinking this will be a test of our ability, whether or not we can actually do that, right? And I think it came out beautifully. So we can do it now. And at this point, I'm waiting for the copyright release from the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family, both for the Korean copy as well as this English rendition. So we will be able to publish in the US publisher, and I have a couple of publishers in mind. Anyway, so that is the report, and those who want to have not seen the exhibit, I'll make myself available so you can ask any questions, etc. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Shin. And next I would like to introduce Dr. Haewon Shin, the Director of Korea Engagement at the UCI Office of Global Engagement. She serves as the international liaison for Korean and Asian relations and works closely with the schools and units on campus to facilitate collaborative relationships and very important global partnerships with educational, governmental, and business entities in Korea and other Asian countries. Now, Dr. Shin also helped initiate the campus's very first international alumni chapter, the UCI Korean alumni chapter in South Korea. And she is also a founding board member of UCI's Korean American alumni chapter. Please join me in welcoming up Dr. Shin.
Thank you, Lorelai, for the introduction. Thank you all for being here. When you hear about war, what images come to mind? What images come to mind?
Death.
Yes, death, guns, soldiers in uniforms, and high-tech weapons. So war images are predominantly military and masculine. However, in truth, a large percent of all war-related casualties are civilians, and majority of them are actually women and children. Comfortwomen refers to sexual slaves who were forced to satisfy the sexual needs of occupying Japanese military authorities during the World War II. Many of them were Korean, but Chinese, Russians, even European women were victims as well. This is not an ancient story. This did not happen too long ago. This happened in the time of our mothers and grandmothers when they were a teenager girl, when they were a young woman. War is a system that is thoroughly gendered. And sexual violence against the woman is a targeted attack that has been used as a weapon in war or any armed conflict. This, unfortunately, continues in today's conflict. You may know and hear about almost 60,000 Muslim girls have been raped during the Bosnian War in early 1990s. Recently, Time and BBC News reported that thousands of North Korean girls and women have fled to China, and approximately 60% of them are trafficked into the sex trade, with 50% of them forced into prostitution as low as $4 for their services, and 30% into the marriage, and another 15% go into the cyber sex. I am so proud and grateful that UC Irvine is the forefront of women's human rights by bringing these undocumented stories and archival materials into light. The war that women remember is very different from the stories shared or written mostly by men, because the beginning and end of the war they remember. The violence, the fear that they experienced are closely related to the fact that they are women. In this regard, UCI Library's exhibit and Professor Jung-Woo Choi's English translation project of Korean Comfort Woman testimonies are so important. Korean Comfort Woman project is just the beginning of UCI's Women's Human Rights in War project. Again, I'm so proud of UCI Libraries, Professor Jung-Woo Choi, what she's been done, and the commitment and her commitment in this project. And all of you for taking the time to be here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Hyewon. The next speaker is Victoria Jones, Dr. Victoria Jones, who is the Chief Global Affairs Officer and Assistant Vice Chancellor for Global Engagement Her job and position is important and vast, but succinctly, I'm just going to say that Dr. Jones oversees UCI's global strategy, campus coordination, and diplomacy. Please, Dr. Jones.
I have the privilege of recognizing some people who've made this possible. And I want to start by acknowledging in terms of diplomacy, that although this is still an awkward topic at the highest levels of international relations, that we do have support for the university and for this work in maybe ways that aren't as direct as one would think so many years after, but because of these sensitivities, this kind of support is still critical, even if it's not as overt as one might hope. And so I do want to acknowledge the Academy of Korean Studies, an organ of the Korean government that has provided support to UCI for the Center for Critical Korean Studies, which then became the impetus for this project. This is a huge contribution to humanities and social sciences, almost $1 million, which is not so common in this field, and for which we're very grateful to the Korean government for this support. Also, the Korea Foundation, another branch of the Korean government with the charge to help the world understand Korean culture, and they have also provided several faculty positions and funded faculty positions, as well as funding the Korea Corner in our own libraries. And each year we have an intern that comes to us from the Korea Foundation and works in our libraries from Korea, and that's the woman who helped to put this project together. And so again, I want to be very careful in the way I thank the Korean government because of the sensitivities, but we have a lot of support for the work we do on this campus from those offices of the government that are able to do that for us. So I also want to recognize Chancellor Howard Gilman. I was actually traveling, Hae-Won Shin and I, with Chancellor Gilman a few years ago in Korea, and we were on a golf cart on the Korea University campus, and we're being shown around the campus, and there's a large poster and exhibit, and it was talking about comfort women. And we began just on this tour of the campus for an academic exchange to talk about the comfort women, and Chancellor Gilman thought, you know, with these stories, our library has expertise in oral storytelling through the Vietnamese project. Wouldn't it be interesting if UCI was in some way able to participate and collaborate and be a partner to Korea in remembering the comfort women? And that was the beginning of UCI's participation. And we came back and began to approach the library and Professor Chung Woo Choi, Center for Korean Studies, the resources that we have on this campus, and say, what could we do? And we actually have a proposal before the Ministry of Women and Family in Korea to help formally with the project. We also, as you can see, have this other way that this has come to fulfillment and fruition, not just through the oral translations or the oral histories, but also through written translation and written history. And so I want to be sure that we recognize Chancellor Howard Gilman as well, who can't be here, but thanks you for being here, and sends his great appreciation to Dr. Chung Woo Choi. I also want to recognize the people on the campus. So Lorelei Tamji, the head of our libraries, has been introducing everybody else, but she also deserves a tremendous amount of credit and appreciation for carrying this and bringing it to fruition, and I want to recognize her. Thank you. I love how I showed up in her office one day and said, okay, here's an idea. It's all about the library. It's not nothing to do with my office. It's just the idea generator for my office. And she said, sure, let's do it. That takes a certain kind of power, and I really appreciate that, and we're seeing it today. Hae-Won Shin, again, nothing happens with UCI in Korea that Hae-Won doesn't have a hand in, and I'm so grateful for all that you do, and the moving words that you gave us this evening tell how much that you really are committed to the work of both UCI and this particular project. I want to thank you. CCKS, the Center for Critical Korean Studies, that has been a home and an academic unit to support this. Dean Tyrus Miller, who's the dean who supervises that project, thank you very, very much. I don't know if Song Richardson was able to come. She was trying. So she's not here, but let me tell you, she really wanted to be here. So she also deserves appreciation for that. There are two trustees here today that I want to recognize who support UCI in so many ways in our local community, and that's Nancy Yoon and Carol Choi. Thank you very much for being here. And then I wanted to pause for one moment and think a little bit about what we've talked about in terms of war, and that women are often victims of war, and the unrecognized victims of war. And the thing that concerns me, though, is that that's not the end, because when the war ends, and the governments have to become friends again, and there's trade, and there's diplomacy, and all those critically important things for nation states, sometimes these stories get buried in order to make progress on a diplomatic front, and we lose the opportunity to speak about the human cost. And there have been two women I want to recognize that are part of our local community who have tried to give voice to the comfort women in a time dating back 20, 30 years that made it even more difficult than it is today, even more sensitive than it is today, and they persisted. And they were pushed aside, and they were told, this isn't a good moment. We don't want to mention these difficulties because we're getting along better now as nation states. And so maybe we shouldn't discuss these issues right now because it's just not good timing, because it's inconvenient. And these women persisted. And one of them is Ji-hee He, and she persisted in such a way, she's not able to be here this evening, but again, I want to recognize her because it was through her efforts in 2007 when the U.S. House of Representatives actually made a declaration about the Japanese government and military and the comfort women. And it was a courageous woman in our own community in Southern California who pushed that forward. So even though she's not here, I would like to applaud her and thank her. And the other woman is Chung Choi. She began this work at a time when it created great personal distress, when she was criticized for telling the stories. And a year ago, I came back and said, would you be willing to try again? She said, it's very, very hard. She said, you don't know what you're asking me. And then she said, yes. And here we are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Before we conclude the program this evening, I'd like to extend an invitation to all of you to join us at an upcoming event. You can visit our website or follow our social media to receive updates or drop by our information desk to be added to our event notification listserv. Spring 2020, we will celebrate the 30th anniversary of the East Asian collection in the libraries, and that exhibit will highlight some very interesting and unique library materials related to Korea, China, and Japan. So you won't want to miss that either. And so now it's time for the reception and exhibit viewing. Please join me in a final thank you to the speakers, and thank you all for coming.